Good day to everyone. My report today is all about the Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln. And I am your presenter, George Kevin R. Napudo. But first, we have to discuss the author's background. Abraham Lincoln, by name Honest Abe, the rail splitter or the great emancipator, born on February 12, 1809 near Hudgenville, Kentucky, U.S., and died on April 15, 1865 in Washington, D.C. The 16th President of the United States who preserved the Union during the American Civil War and brought about the emancipation of enslaved people in the United States. Among American heroes, Lincoln continues to have a unique appeal for his fellow countrymen and also for people of other lands. This charm derives from his remarkable life story, the rise from humble origin, the dramatic death, and from his distinctive human and humane personality, as well as from historical role as savior of the Union and emancipator of enslaved people. His relevance endures and grows especially because of his eloquence as a spokesman for democracy. In his view, the Union worth saying not only for its own sake but because it embodied an ideal, the ideal of self-government. In recent years, the political side to Lincoln characters and his racial views in particular have come under close scrutiny as scholars continue to find him as a rich subject research. The Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. was dedicated to him on May 30, 1922. And let us now proceed to the summary of the story. The Battle of Gettysburg was fought between July 1 and July 3, 1863, and it was one of the bloodiest battles of the United States Civil War with over 51,000 casualties, soldiers killed, injured, or otherwise lost to action. Around 3,100 U.S. troops were killed while 3,900 Confederates died. The United States victory there marked the turning point of the war. President Lincoln was asked to deliver a message at the dedication of the Gettysburg Civil War Cemetery on November 9, 1863. The featured speaker for the occasion was Edward Everett, a former dean of Harvard University and one of the most famous orators of his day. He spoke for 2 hours, then Lincoln delivered his message and it took 2 minutes. Lincoln tied the current struggle to the days of signing of the Declaration of Independence, speaking of the principles that the nation was conceived in liberty and the proposition that all men are created equal. Moreover, he tied both the abolition of slavery, a new birth of freedom, and the maintenance of representative government. Despite its brevity, since the speech was delivered, it has come to be recognized as one of the most powerful statements in English language and, in fact, one of the most important expressions of freedoms and liberty in any language. Indeed, Everett immediately afterward wrote to Lincoln that I wish that I could flatter myself that I had come as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes. Next is the literal meaning of the story. Students should comprehend the literal meaning of Lincoln's words that those who fought have sanctified the graveyard more than speeches ever could. This is the literal meaning of Lincoln's speech, which is to seek freedom and unity towards his countrymen. In it, he invoked the principles of human equality contained in the Declaration of Independence and connected the sacrifices of the Civil War with the desire for a new birth of freedom, as well as the all-important preservation of the Union created in 1776 and its ideal of self-government. And let us now proceed to the connotative meaning of the story. Lincoln was declaring that the United States would continue to fight to preserve the nation that was created by the founding fathers who wrote the Declaration of Independence in 1776. The connotative meaning of his speech was to embrace their sociological perspective to be united and the subject doing the action. Therefore, the ideals are worth dying for, and that it is up to the living to carry on the work of those who died to protect ideals. The ideals of equality and freedom are the bedrock of the United States as a nation. So let us now proceed to the influences of the story. And for social, well, the Gettysburg Address is a historical artifact that has a huge impact on how American culture and society are today. The Gettysburg Address contributed to the civil rights movement and helped Lincoln put new amendments in effect. For political, the stated purpose of Lincoln's speech was to dedicate a plot of land that would become Soldiers' National Cemetery. However, Lincoln realized that he also had to inspire the people to continue the fight. Below is the text of the Gettysburg Address interspersed with my thoughts of what made it so memorable. Lincoln's legacy is based on his momentous achievements. He also successfully waged a political struggles and civil war that preserved the Union, ended slavery, and created the possibility of civil war and social freedom for African Americans. Although exceedingly brief, the Gettysburg Address is remembered as one of the America's greatest political speeches. In its immediate context, the Gettysburg Address was meant to help dedicate the cemetery at Gettysburg. For philosophical influence, the Gettysburg Address remains as powerful as it does because it became a yardstick against which we measure our society. Later generations have built on Lincoln's words, using the spot where they were spoken to rally their listeners to take up the unfinished work of freedom and democracy in their own ages. Lincoln's philosophical views was slavery. Lincoln stated was the reason for the war. 1/8 for the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. And for historical influence, it was delivered by Lincoln during the American Civil War on the afternoon of Thursday, November 19, 1863, at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, 4.5 months after the Union armies defeated those of the Confederacy at the Battle of Gettysburg. Well, the Gettysburg Address is a historical artifact that has a huge impact on how American culture and society are today. And for the last influence, which is sociological, one of his two main purposes for writing and delivering this speech was to reinforce the fact that those men who gave their lives did not die in vain. That from this honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave their last full measure of devotion. The Gettysburg Address gave meaning to the sacrifice of over 50,000 men who laid down their lives in the Battle of Gettysburg. The Gettysburg Address declared that the United States had to stand as a country where all men are created equal and should be treated as equals. Let us now proceed to the literary devices used in the story. Throughout the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln uses the literary device of anaphora, the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of the series of statements. The Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln signaled the ending of the Battle of Gettysburg and the American Civil War. The Gettysburg Address has dedicated to our nation that freedom that all men are equal. The brave soldiers who have risked their lives so that our new nation could be conceived in liberty will forever be remembered. Abraham Lincoln also used literary devices like alliteration, repetition, and personification to produce a special effect in his speech. He stated his speech off with an allusion. And let us now proceed to the theme of the story. The main theme of the Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln is unity. There is also the unifying theme of the address, woven throughout from the beginning to end, is the conception, birth, sacrificial death, and new birth of the nation. And there are also other themes like duty and obligation are the cornerstones on which any military tradition is based. Patriotism is the feeling of love, devotion, and sense of attachment to one's country. And last, equality for people and to his fellow countrymen to serve justice and truthfulness. And that concludes my report about the Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln. I am George Kevin Arnapudo, your reporter. Thank you for listening.